Ares was the god of war. His own family couldn't stand him, not his father, not his mother, not even the goddess who loved him. This is the story of the most hated god on Olympus, and the one time he got stuffed inside a jar for over a year. Ares was the son of Zeus and Hera, born from the one union between the king and queen of the gods that actually produced a legitimate heir. You'd think that pedigree would earn him respect. It didn't. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus tells Ares directly to his face that he is the most hated of all his children on Olympus, disgusted by his son's love of conflict for its own sake. Hera wasn't much warmer. Even his own mother found little to admire in a son who embodied violence, bloodlust, and chaos rather than the discipline and strategy the Greeks actually respected in warfare. That distinction mattered enormously to the ancient Greeks. Where Athena represented calculated military strategy, a contrast her own episode on this channel explores from the opposite side, Ares represented war's raw, chaotic bloodshed, the frenzy of battle rather than the intelligence behind it. Greek culture valued discipline and tactics far more than unchecked aggression, which is likely a major reason Ares never received the widespread devotion that gods like Athena or Apollo did. He had remarkably few major temples compared to his Olympian status, and even his own family treated him more as a necessary evil than a source of pride. Ares' geography reflected exactly how the Greeks felt about him. While every other major Olympian was closely tied to a specific Greek city-state, ancient sources consistently placed Ares' true home not in Greece at all, but in Thrace, a rugged frontier region to the north the Greeks themselves associated with barbarism and untamed violence. Treating their own god of war as somehow foreign was a pointed statement in itself. War, to the Greek mind, was a necessary tool of civilization, not a virtue worth celebrating on its own, and the god who embodied violence purely for its own sake belonged, symbolically, outside the borders of civilized Greek life altogether. Not every Greek city treated Ares with contempt, though. Sparta was the one glaring exception. A militaristic society built almost entirely around discipline in war, and the one place in Greece that genuinely embraced him as a civic ideal rather than a necessary evil. The Spartans kept a statue of Ares bound in chains inside their city, not as an insult, but as a deliberate symbol. The god of war, permanently shackled, could never abandon Sparta or flee to fight for anyone else. It's a strange kind of devotion, worship built on captivity rather than reverence, but it made Ares the closest thing Sparta had to a patron god, in a culture that otherwise took its cues from Athena's strategic discipline everywhere else in Greece. Ares' most famous myth isn't even a battle, it's an affair. He carried on a long relationship with Aphrodite, goddess of love, despite her being married to Hephaestus, the god of the forge. Hephaestus eventually discovered the affair and built an ingenious, invisible net of bronze chains, rigging it above his own marriage bed. The next time Ares and Aphrodite met there, the net dropped, trapping them both. Hephaestus then summoned every other Olympian god to come witness the spectacle, publicly humiliating them in front of the entire pantheon. According to Homer, the gods didn't pity Ares. They laughed. That affair with Aphrodite produced several children who became deeply woven into how the Greeks understood warfare itself. Phobos, meaning fear, and Deimos, meaning dread, became personifications of the terror soldiers felt before and during battle, often depicted as Ares' companions riding alongside him into war. Their names survive today directly. Phobos and Deimos are literally the names of Mars's two moons. Strangely, that same union also produced Harmonia, goddess of harmony and concord, a genuinely ironic daughter for the god of chaotic violence to father. Ares' bloodline reached even further than his own children, though. Long before Harmonia was born, Ares guarded a sacred spring near the future site of Thebes with a monstrous dragon, his own creature, coiled and merciless. When the hero Cadmus arrived searching for water, The dragon killed several of his men before Cadmus finally struck it down. Ares did not forgive the killing of his dragon easily. Cadmus was sentenced to serve him for 8 full years in penance, a debt paid in devotion rather than blood. Only after that sentence ended did the gods allow Cadmus to marry Ares' own daughter, Harmonia, uniting the bloodline of war with the city Cadmus had just founded, Thebes itself, built on the very site where Ares' dragon once stood guard. For a god of war, Ares had a surprisingly poor track record in actual combat against mortals. During the Trojan War, the mortal warrior Diomedes wounded Ares directly in battle, with Athena's direct assistance guiding the spear. Ares reportedly screamed in pain loud enough to be heard by thousands of soldiers on both sides, a deeply undignified moment for the god who was supposed to embody warfare itself. Heracles wounded him on more than one occasion during his labors as well. For a god whose entire identity was violence, Ares lost an unusual number of the actual fights he found himself in. Ares' anger reached a genuine peak when his own son entered the story. Cycnus, a son of Ares, built a shrine from the skulls of travelers he murdered and robbed on the road to Delphi. When Heracles arrived to stop him, Cycnus fought back with his father's blessing, and Ares himself entered the battle personally, determined to avenge his son directly rather than watch from Olympus. Heracles wounded Ares a second time in that fight, forcing him to retreat, and only Zeus's own thunderbolt, hurled directly between the two combatants, finally ended it before the fight escalated further. It was, even by Ares' own standard, a familiar pattern. Every time he stepped onto a battlefield in person, somebody's hero walked away having beaten him. Before the most embarrassing moment in Ares' entire mythology, stuffed in a jar for over a year, hit, like, and subscribe. His most humiliating defeat, though, involved no combat at all. 2 giant brothers, Otis and Ephialtes, once managed to capture Ares and stuff him into a bronze jar, sealing him inside for 13 straight months. The god of war spent over a year trapped, unable to fight his way out, until Hermes finally located him and secretly freed him before he wasted away entirely. It's hard to imagine a more embarrassing story for a war god than being outsmarted and jarred like preserves by 2 mortals. Ares wasn't entirely without a code, though. When Poseidon's son assaulted Ares' daughter Alcippe, Ares killed him in retaliation. Poseidon demanded justice, and Ares was put on trial before a tribunal of the gods on a rocky hill in Athens. The gods acquitted him, ruling the killing justified. That hill became known as the Areopagus, Ares Hill, and it later became the site of one of ancient Athens' most important legal and governmental councils, a permanent institution built on the site of Ares' one moment of vindication. Ares' most lasting legacy may not be his sons at all, but his daughters. Ancient sources name him father of the Amazons, the legendary all-female warrior nation that produced some of Greek mythology's fiercest fighters. Hippolyta, their queen, wore a girdle gifted by her father himself, the exact prize Heracles was sent to retrieve as one of his 12 labors. Generations later, another daughter of Ares, Penthesilea, led the Amazons into the Trojan War on Troy's side, fighting and falling at the hands of Achilles himself. Where Phobos and Deimos, Ares' sons, personified the fear and dread soldiers felt before battle, his daughters embodied something else entirely. Warriors who answered to no one, forged in their father's own image, minus every ounce of his disgrace. Much of what we know about Ares comes from Homer's Iliad, where he fights for Troy and is repeatedly humiliated by Greek heroes and rival gods alike, and Hesiod's Theogony, which establishes his parentage and his children with Aphrodite. Interestingly, Ares' reputation underwent a dramatic transformation in Roman mythology. As Mars, he became one of Rome's most important and respected deities, genuinely central to Roman identity as a military society, second in importance only to Jupiter himself. The same god the Greeks treated with contempt, the Romans practically worshipped as a national symbol. Ares' legacy is a strange one, a god who embodied one of the most fundamental forces in ancient life, warfare, yet was consistently disrespected, wounded, humiliated, and even imprisoned throughout his own mythology. The Greeks seem to use his stories almost as a warning. Violence without strategy, without restraint, without wisdom, ultimately gets you stuffed in a jar for over a year. It's telling that his own sister Athena, representing everything he lacked, is remembered as one of the wisest gods in the pantheon, while Ares remains one of the most mocked. We've now covered Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon, and this channel isn't done with the Olympians yet. Subscribe so you don't miss whoever comes next.